The writ was dropped in New Brunswick this morning as Premier Blaine Higgs asked the Lieutenant Governor to dissolve the provincial legislature. But the start of this campaign comes as Angus Reid has some dismal news for Higgs. The Institute's latest poll saying his approval rating is only 30%, the lowest of all the country's premiers. That is less than half the approval rating of Manitoba Premier Wab Kinew, who registered the highest of the premiers at 66% approval. Still, Mr. Higgs is hoping his Progressive Conservative Party can secure a third mandate. Take a listen.
I would encourage anyone not to get locked into any one particular issue, but look at the province as a whole and say, we haven't experienced this ever. We haven't experienced tourism like we've seen, the major events that happen in the province. We haven't experienced the growth like we've seen in housing or population. We haven't experienced the private sector growth that we're seeing in investment.
Well, with more on the New Brunswick campaign, we're now joined by John Chilibeck. He is a legislative reporter for the Telegraph-Journal newspaper. John, thank you for joining us.
No problem, Mike.
So listen, Mr. Higgs, he's trying to secure a third mandate, but he has had a rocky year, not only with New Brunswickers, but also with members of his own party. How is he and the PC team looking right now as the campaign gets underway?
Well, he did have a mini caucus revolt last year, and because he lost 7 of those 8 people who were revolting out of his caucus, they're not reoffering. He has lost a lot of volunteers that help you run a campaign. Now, having said that, he's coming out today firing and saying that he's brought New Brunswick to a certain place. He's increased the population since he took power 6 years ago by about 100,000 people. And for someone in Ontario, that might not seem like a lot, but this is a province that only has 860,000 people right now. So it's sizable, but with that comes some growing pains, and he's pointed that out. And he says that he'll offer one big juicy promise, and that's a big cut to the HST. He says he'll shave 2 points off the 15% HST sales tax, and he says that's what people need in this cost of living crisis.
Mm-hmm. So that is his big promise as the campaign gets underway. Listen, let's talk about the Liberals as well, because the last Liberal Premier in New Brunswick was Brian Gallant in 2018. Under his leadership, the party won the popular vote, but not the seat count. How are the Liberals looking this time around?
Well, they're looking better than under the previous leader, Kevin Vickers. He's famous for having taken down that terrorist in the House of Commons several years ago in an attack, and he was also the ambassador to Ireland. He's a native New Brunswicker, but he didn't do well in the last election in 2020 when Higgs won a majority. They have a new leader, Susan Holt, and she's energized them. She's actually from a business background just like Premier Higgs. So she was the head of the New Brunswick Business Council years ago. She was also an advisor to the Gallant government. And she has some bona fides. So she's promised not to reduce the HST like Higgs. She says that would drain the accounts for New Brunswick, but she's focused on healthcare and on schools. She's promised to make sure that every child has a free breakfast every morning. That's sort of playing off of a Higgs promise that every kid would have a free breakfast by 2021, which didn't happen. Mm-hmm. And also pay-as-you-go lunch. She's also promised to knock the HST completely off of electricity bills. In New Brunswick, NB Power has said they will raise electricity rates this year and next by 20%. And since most people here have electric baseboard heating, that's going to kill them on their power bills.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So again, another bread and butter issue. You know, very quickly, the Greens, how much of a factor will they play this time around?
Well, they could play spoiler. They have 3 seats in the 49-seat legislature. And if this race ends up being close, as it could be in 2018, they could hold the balance of power. So David Kuhn, the leader, he's very well respected in the legislature. He's very studious, let's say, and knows how to draft legislation. He has said that he's already got a list of demands that he'll pose probably to the Liberals if he holds the balance of power after the October 21st election. He hasn't told reporters what those are, but for instance, he said he wants to offer energy rebates to the working poor and people on fixed incomes, $300 a year. And he also has a slew of environmental measures he wants to see put in place. So it'll be interesting to see what he promises during this election and whether that will come to pass after October 21st.
Mm-hmm. Now, of course, Mr. Higgs, as Premier, took some heat for the way he handled French education in the province, also for his stance on trans students in the province. How do you think those issues might play out? Put them up against the other issues that might actually play big this time around.
Well, Premier Higgs has a problem in Francophone regions in New Brunswick because he promised to learn French, and he really has. And he even was very apologetic this morning at the Lieutenant Governor's, where he held a news conference. So he hasn't really made inroads, and the Liberals have pretty much won all those ridings. So for him to have a breakthrough in Francophone New Brunswick, it'll take quite a bit. Now he's recruited, bilingual candidates and such, so hopefully they can carry the message for him in his case. When it comes to the transgender issue, this is a funny one because he's really speaking to his base, people who would already vote for him, I think, in that regard. So he's sort of come out against a policy that they had in schools, that children under the age of 16 could use their preferred pronoun or name without their parents' consent. And he's sort of calling this a parental rights issue. But I think who that appeals to is people who probably already voted for him before. So I'm not sure how much of an issue it'll play in this election, other than it might galvanize people on both sides, people who are for and against it, and it might get them to volunteer and vote. We've already seen a lot of literature coming through the mail here by an organization called Campaign Life Coalition, telling people to vote for Higgs and not for Susan Holt.
Okay. Well, of course, the campaign is just underway with the writ being dropped today, so we're watching closely, John. Hopefully you and I will speak again in the weeks to come, but for this evening, thank you for that.
Great. Thanks, Mike.